Welcome to my corner of the garage. Today I'm going to be building a serving tray with some custom brass and walnut handles. And this portion here is pretty straightforward. You could use any combination of wood species. I just happen to have some white oak cutoffs and some walnut strips that were laying around in my scrap pile. So I'm going to make this out of white oak and walnut. It's really pretty contrast together, but just gluing this up. Once it dried, could get the squeeze out cleaned up. Here's where things will start to get a little more interesting. I thought about just buying some handles off of Amazon for the serving tray, which is going to be a wedding gift, but then I thought, you know what? Let me try and make something that will really fit with this piece specifically. And I had some brass rods laying around from some other projects, and I love the contrast between black walnut and brass. So here I am marking out where those little legs are going to go, what attaches to the serving tray. So I've got the holes marked out in these handles. I'm going to go drill those out. They are 3/8 of an inch brass rods, solid brass rods, and so here, going to drill those out at the moment. One option would be to stop the plunge here and not make a through hole. I, however, really want that brass to contrast in the handle, so I'm going ahead and drilling that hole all the way through. You could do this with, a dowel, other material, contrasting. But like I said, I really wanted to make it pop a little bit more with the brass, so I'm getting these positioned up exactly where they're going to go on the serving tray. And then what I can do then is, by actually using the handle itself, bring that drill bit over and give it a little tap so I know right where to drill the corresponding holes into the serving tray themselves. As I prepare to drill out the corresponding holes in the serving tray, I am going to set the depth of cut here. I'm going about 1/4 of an inch into the material, so I'm going to set my drill press accordingly. And you could go all the way through. I didn't want to. I'm going to use epoxy instead of using any kind of mechanical connection to keep that in there. So I'm just setting the depth here so they're all exactly the same. Not going to use as much brass that way in the end. The measurement here really is just the thickness of your handle plus how deep it's going into the serving tray, and then however much you want to be able to have the handle off of the serving tray for your hand to get in there. I have a little cradle here that helps with this cut. Obviously, it being a round brass rod, it wanted to grab and spin, so that makes it a little safer. Then I am squaring up each of the ends in addition to getting them to their exact size as measured by the caliper. So all of those pieces are going to be exactly the same. That way you're not going to have your handles askew or anything like that. Putting a little bit of a chamfer kind of on the edges that are going to go down into the serving tray to help guide them into those holes a little bit better. It's a snug fit. And this is kind of an important step. I am making some little dimples in the brass on both ends, but this is going to give a place for the epoxy to go so that it's not just this shiny brass rod that doesn't really have anywhere for the adhesive to connect to. I'm going to drill some corresponding holes later that you'll see into the wood itself. It's time to make the profile of the serving tray a little more interesting. You could do whatever you want on this. Here's what I came up with. This is going to be a simple 1/8 inch round over on the top of the tray just to break that edge a little bit, give it a smooth surface for your hand to run over. And because these are custom handles that I'm making specifically to tie in with the design of this serving tray, I'm doing the same on the tops of those handles by putting in that same profile, just an 1/8 inch round over. And here's kind of just another fun preferential thing. I like putting different degreed chamfers on the bottom of some of my pieces, like serving trays and cutting boards. And this is actually a 22.5 degree chamfer bit. I'm going to start out again doing the exact same profile, just to a smaller degree on the handles. And then I will do the same, taking off a bit more material since the serving tray is thicker. But as you'll see at the end, it really does make them match. It looks purposeful, and the tops of both are rounded over, and then the bottom of them have the exact same chamfer underneath. We won't spend too long on this step, but I definitely would recommend applying a little bit of water before your final sanding. This raises the grain so that the finish doesn't pop up that grain when you complete it. So I'm going to put my brand on it now, do one final sanding, and then we'll get into the assembly. Here are those little dimples that I'm now drilling into the wood themselves. Again, it's just to give a place for that epoxy to go, to help strengthen that connection, since they're brass rods going to be sitting in there. Not a whole lot of surface for the epoxy to grab, so this is just going to kind of rough up the inside, make it really strong with that epoxy bond. I'm using some blue painter's tape to put around the hole, as that's where the epoxy is going to go, the brass rod's going to go in there. So we're going to get some squeeze out. A couple of tips here. I would have put more painter's tape on these handles just to keep the mess down. That epoxy kind of goes everywhere. Had a little bit of sanding cleanup to do. Not bad, but it would have been easy just to tape these things up more. The other tip would be not to do what I'm doing here by using a knife. I'll show you a better method here in a little bit, but mixing that epoxy up, and then we can get these in.
Got 5 minutes to work. No pressure. Here we go. There's nothing. Hey, it's coming through. On to the next one now.
This actually ended up going very well, and once the epoxy cured, I was able to just take a sander and really clean up the tops of these handles to flush everything up nicely, make it look nice and clean. Now underneath, like I said, because I used that knife, there's a little cleanup to do around the brass rods, but I'll show you a better method as I am about to attach that to the serving tray here coming up in a bit. During the installation, some of the epoxy drizzled into places it wasn't supposed to go, so a little bit of sandpaper, cleaned that up okay. I was able to wipe it down with some acetone right after, so it didn't get everywhere. But here's a much better method. If you use the same drill bit to kind of just barely touch some painter's tape to make a nice clean hole, the exact diameter of these brass rods, then now you've got a perfect hole that won't allow any squeeze out. A knife hole is going to have some jagged edges. This ended up being super crisp, and that really helped keep the epoxy from getting where it wasn't supposed to, and made the cleanup process really nice. And you'll see the end results here that this is a much better method. I added a little bit more blue painter's tape, again, all around where that's going to be. Didn't have any issues this time. And so here we go, adding some more epoxy both to the rods and to those holes. Got my mallet ready, and you'll definitely want to use a scrap piece of wood. You don't want to hammer down on that handle itself or you'll mar it up. But once it's in place, just put a little piece of scrap white oak, what I had on hand, give it some wax, and that seated in very nicely. I cleaned up any of that epoxy squeeze out with just a shop rag dipped in acetone to get the majority of it, and I pretty quickly took off the painter's tape. It's 5-minute epoxy, so it was already starting to kind of gum up, and then any stuff that was left over I could just scrape off with a little knife. But it didn't really require too much cleanup, and as you can see, that ended up being a really clean installation. I really debated about how I wanted to finish this, and my normal go-to for like cutting boards is just a mineral oil with some natural waxes. And this isn't probably going to see a whole lot of food. It's more meant, to set things on. So I went with this paste wax, which did bring out the walnut and the white oak nicely. Hopefully gave it a little more protection, long-lasting protection than, mineral oil-based finish wood. So hopefully this build video gave you some ideas of things you might want to incorporate in your future projects. I'm really liking this series on just wooden gift ideas and plan to add more in the future. So at this time, just enjoy some beauty shots of the final product. Thanks again.